I'm joined by Congresswoman Mikie Sherrill of New Jersey's 11th Congressional District. Congresswoman, I just got to give your background here, though, as I start to ask you about Donald Trump, and I call him Shady Vance, talking about Governor Walz and saying that accusing Governor Walz, who served with distinction in the military for 24 years, of stolen valor. I just want people to know your background. After graduating, and if I say anything wrong here, correct me. After graduating from the Naval Academy in 1994, the Congresswoman became a U.S. Navy H-3 Sea King helicopter pilot and Russian policy officer. Sherrill flew missions throughout Europe and in the Middle East. In 2000, she was based in the Naval Air Station in Corpus Christi, a Russian policy officer as well. When you worked in the Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. At the Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Navy in Europe, you served in the U.S. Navy for 9 years, the final 5 as a lieutenant. Got that right?
You have a lot of that right. I will say, I don't think it wasn't 2003. I was stationed at NAS Corpus Christi. I have been stationed there, but God forbid I get one thing wrong in my service, because then I'm sure not one of the 10 years will count, according to Republicans in this country. So yes, it was not 2003 that I served in Corpus Christi. It was earlier than that.
You see, I made that slight error on purpose to make the broader point that I want to make here. But look, Donald Trump, and also there's Donald Trump of all people, who claimed that he had bone spurs to, avoid service. He posted this yesterday. This is Trump posting this. It was a repost. He posted like 27 things in an hour in this unhinged mental breakdown of his. But he posts stolen valor with a photo of Governor Walz. I think it was important that I gave your background just so people understand too, in addition to being a congresswoman, what you did before that. What's your reaction to this?
Well, Donald Trump couldn't even define valor to begin with. So the fact that he is suggesting that Governor Walz has stolen valor in some way, shape, or form is incredibly offensive to me. Trump wouldn't even understand the concept of valor. So here we have a person who served for 24 years in the National Guard, something I'm sure Trump doesn't appreciate because he thinks anyone who serves is a sucker or a loser. But here is somebody who I believe served our nation in the National Guard, and I think that is an honorable thing to do, and I very much appreciate his service. I even appreciate the service of J.D. Vance, because I think it's honorable to serve your country, and I think it's dishonorable to go after veterans on that service, especially with untruths. So what we know is that we have Walz, who served his country for 24 years. Might I just remind people that a general retirement out of our United States military is at 20 years. So he surpassed even that, served for 24 years, and then decided to continue his service in Congress to really address some of the things he cared about for veterans, and did, in fact, work on the veteran affairs community. So he serves for 24 years, decides to get out to run for Congress, where he thinks he can continue his service to his country and to the people in his community. And yet now is being told that because he got out of the military, before, quite frankly, his unit was even told that they might be deploying to Iraq, because he got out of the military at that time and his unit later deployed to Iraq, that somehow he has shirked his duty. I am shocked that they are throwing around this accusation, and quite frankly, it's, as I've said before, it's the same old bullshit they did with the SWIFT boats, which many of us of a certain generation, veterans of a certain generation, remember the details of that. It is actually the same guy working on this campaign who did the SWIFT boat attacks, who is now doing it again, because they're one-trick ponies in the Republican Party. They don't have any policy. They don't have any vision of the future. They simply want to divide us. They want to put out misinformation on the things that we care most deeply about, and in this case, our veterans. If it doesn't come across, then let me just state it clearly. I'm incredibly offended by this as a veteran, and most of my veteran colleagues are as well.
Jason Kander, a veteran as well, who has a show on the MeidasTouch network, he said, in the military and veteran community, the term stolen valor is a serious accusation on the highest level. To steal valor is to commit one of the gravest offenses. The fact that J.D. Vance and Donald Trump throw it around so recklessly and dishonestly is character revealing. And character revealing when it comes to Donald Trump as well, is the types of things that he's said about the military in the past. I mean, this video has been recirculating here, which to me, it's just, other than to describe it as grotesque and odd, this was Donald Trump when he went on Howard Stern and he compared his own, he said that his own Vietnam was purportedly avoiding STDs in the 1970s. And this is what Donald Trump, was talking about. And by the way, there was far worse interviews that he's done with Stern that I'm not going to play here. But let me just share this one right here. Let's play it.
You got to say to a woman, hey, listen, you got to go to my personal doctor and I'm going to have you checked out. Is that a tough thing to say to a woman, or you just got the balls to say it?
I'll tell you, it's amazing. I can't even believe it. I've been so lucky.
Right.
In terms of that whole world.
You've never gotten a social disease.
It is a dangerous world out there.
It is.
Scary. It's like Vietnam, sort of like, the Vietnam era.
It is your personal Vietnam, isn't it?
It is my personal
It is. You've said that many
I feel
times.
like a great and very brave soldier.
A lot of guys who went through Vietnam came out unscathed. A lot of guys who've gone through the 80s having sex with different women came out with AIDS and all kinds of things.
They survived Vietnam.
This is better than Vietnam.
I have to imagine things like that are just grotesque to your constituents, to this kind. I mean, what? There's so much wrong with that clip, but get your reaction.
It is just part of this pattern and practice that he has of disparaging the military, disparaging service, making fun of service. We don't just have that clip. We have the generals reporting that they heard him say that he thought military service members were suckers and losers who would join the military. We know that he's disparaged Gold Star families who've made the ultimate sacrifice, who've lost their children to war, and he's made, he's disparaged them. He disparaged somebody that I will tell you was a personal hero of mine. Going to the Naval Academy, we've learned about the heroism of John McCain. We learned how he refused to allow the Vietnamese to release him, serve for years in a prison camp because he knew they were just doing it as a publicity stunt. And to have Donald Trump suggest that, they're to disparage John McCain and that kind of service, really that is just beyond offensive. And I think to have someone who was a commander-in-chief and wants to be the commander-in-chief of our military forces again, to have so little respect for our military and for our veterans, I think it's disqualifying. I think every person out there who's worn the uniform should think it's disqualifying. And I think people should speak out against the fact that Trump and Vance are again trying to undermine the service of an honorable veteran like Governor Walz.
You mentioned the late John McCain and what Donald Trump said about his heroism. Here's that clip just so everybody can hear Donald Trump say it. So, because these things all have receipts to them. And I know that in this kind of modern day media age, people throw around a lot of things, but let's just listen to his own words and what he says. Let's play that clip.
He hit me. He's not a war hero. He's a war hero. He's a war hero. 5.5 years. He's a war hero because he was captured. I like people that weren't captured, okay? I hate to tell you. Do you agree with that?
There's that clip, which is, a more well-known clip. But I want to show you this one, Congresswoman. Somewhat nearby your congressional district, Donald Trump spoke in front of a group of young Republicans. These are, anyone from kind of teenagers to young adults. And Donald Trump's speech says that, he lies about all this stuff, but he goes, a general told him that I've seen war, I've seen all of these, difficult things in my times. But Donald, what you did when you called sexually assaulting women locker room talk, that was the bravest, most heroic thing I've ever heard. I just want to show you Donald Trump tells this story to young Republicans. And this clip doesn't get a lot of attention, but it should. Things like this need to be known, I think. Let's play this clip.
But I went onto that stage just a few days later, and a general who's a fantastic general actually said to me, "Sir, I've been on the battlefield. Men have gone down on my left and on my right. I stood on hills where soldiers were killed. But I believe the bravest thing I've ever seen was the night you went onto that stage with Hillary Clinton after what happened. And then that woman asked you the first question about it. And I said, locker room talk. It's locker room talk. What the hell? What are you talking? Locker room talk. That was not a great...
I mean, he's a convicted rapist. He was convicted in civil court. He's a known liar. I don't know a general that would applaud that. It's just really beyond the pale. And you and I were just talking before the show about being young, impressionable law students. I mean, to go before these young Republicans with that type of attitude, it's not just disparaging of our military members, it's certainly disparaging of women. We've seen that as another line of attack that Trump has used. And quite frankly, with this GOP, I think the two intersect. When you think about the fact that we have over 140,000 service members and their families down in Texas right now serving, and Texas is ranked 49th as far as reproductive health care. And we know Trump continues to attack abortion rights, continues to want to implement a nationwide abortion ban. So to see this vein of attacks on veterans, to see this vein of attacks on women that runs through everything he does, I think does not bode well for the country should he ever serve in the Oval Office again.
Let's pivot, though, and talk about the contrast now with Vice President Kamala Harris and Governor Walz and how maybe it's resonating in your congressional district. Just this message of, look, we, of course, need to be realistic about the threats that we're facing, but there should be joy and optimism and finding ways to work together. And is that reaching your congressional district right now, that message?
My God, is it? I mean, we are having the phone ringing off the hook with people that want to volunteer, that want to get out there, that are feeling this renewed sense of energy. Because I think what all of us have been so really, confused, upset, by over these last several years is what Trump represents is not who we are. So to see people following this person who has a sense that we should be divided, we should be angry, we should hate our neighbors, we should love Putin, we should always just be out there to make a buck for ourselves and enrich ourselves and not care about anybody else. That is not who Americans are. That's never been who Americans are. I mean, you don't decide to rise up and fight for the freedoms, not just for yourself, but for everyone. If you are just self-involved and want to enrich yourself, you don't have the first president of the United States turn down the idea that he could be made president for life or the new monarch of this country. If we are a country built on a notion that you are going to simply serve yourself, it is so contrary to the values that we grew up with, that to suddenly see now a candidate like Harris and her running mate Walz project what we know to be true about this country, it finally feels like we're shaking the blinders off a little bit and remembering who we are. Remembering that we are a country that has always tackled almost insurmountable odds when we are in pursuit of doing the right thing, when we act together, when we come together to support our values. And we can be that country again and will be that country again when we have President Harris and Vice President Walz in the White House.
One of the things you and I talked about before this interview, when I was reading up more on your background, was that we went to Georgetown Law right around the same time. You graduated in 2008, I graduated in 2010, and the Supreme Court was right there, like it was right down the block. We had a Supreme Court Institute there. I love taking constitutional law, and I thought, precedent mattered. I looked at precedents like Roe v. Wade and super precedents, and I just, thought this is the way it is. When I took administrative law, the way agencies, were supposed to work, Chevron deference, all of these concepts in the past year, 2 years have just been, overturned. Freedoms and rights have been taken away from we the people by this right-wing Supreme Court. And I know that one of the things you've introduced recently is a bill that would bring ethics and transparency to the Supreme Court. How important is that to you? And especially with your background as a veteran, as a law student right across the street, basically from the Supreme Court, now as a congresswoman. Tell us about the legislation you're introducing.
Yeah, I mean, it seems as if members of the Supreme Court, certain members of the Supreme Court especially, have given up all pretense of following any sort of precedent or legal philosophy in favor of, again, just enriching themselves, having people take them on $500,000 fishing trips in Alaska who have business before the court, or having Harlan Crow, the funder of the original Swift boat attacks for John Kerry, having Harlan Crow fund your mother's mortgage or your RV or your own personal trips, as he did for Justice Thomas. And then having your spouses, like Justice Thomas's spouse, who's very involved in partisan MAGA politics, or Justice Alito's spouse, who seem to deny the credibility of our democratic elections here in the United States of America. You know, having these spouses get engaged in very partisan ways, it makes you question why those justices are on the bench, who they are serving, and why they are making the certain decisions that they are making. And especially when we are at a time when the court is tearing apart many of the things that are go to the heart of how we operate our democratic form of government, go to the heart of the fact that no one, you know, when I was a federal prosecutor, I was fond of saying no one's above the law. Well, the Supreme Court has indicated that presidents can be above the law. That's not called a democratically elected president. That's called a monarch. That's what we got rid of with the Revolutionary War. So we're also seeing, as you see, tearing down Chevron deference, the very thing that makes sure we have clean drinking water and our kids are safe. We're seeing the overturning of Roe, that court that Trump built to overturn Roe, and the continued attacks on women, and continuing to bring up these cases, taking these cases, and then when they see the politics aren't right for it, saying they're not right, or they shouldn't have taken the case. That wasn't a decision based on any precedent or law. That was a decision based on, they looked at the political winds and thought, you know what, if we decide another abortion case, that could be bad for Trump, because we are so out of step with the country. We are so out of step with 70% of the American people and women across this country. And we don't want to point out right now how much we are trying to undermine the rights and freedoms of women. So we'll pretend this case isn't right. I can almost guarantee you they're going to pick that case up again as soon as the election's over. I mean, this is a court that most Americans are finding very partisan and untrustworthy, which is why I'm helping to lead legislation on ethics reform there. Things like making sure the justices have ethics training, which they seem to sorely need, making sure there's an independent investigatory body for the Supreme Court, like there is for federal agencies, like the NCIS for the Navy. And then having a report to Congress on their findings to help hold the court more accountable for these ethical lapses and breaches.
Congresswoman Mikie Sherrill, Navy pilot, lawyer, federal prosecutor, Congresswoman, thanks for joining us. And everybody, read up on Congresswoman Sherrill's background. Incredible, and we appreciate your service and sharing your perspective on Governor Walz and the Harris ticket as well.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Have a great one.
Hit subscribe. We're on our way to 3 million subscribers. Let's get there this month.
Real quick, Meta just changed their algorithm to suppress political content. Please follow our Instagram @MeidasTouch right now as we head towards 400,000 followers so you don't miss a beat.